The Roberts Court has moved in exactly the opposite way. We've had two cases dealing with contribution limits. First, the Randall v. Sorrell case, which was mentioned a few minutes ago. This was the first time the court struck down a contribution limit as too low, much less deference. There was no majority opinion. I got the sense that Justice Breyer, who wrote an opinion for himself, as well as Justice Alito and Chief Justice Roberts, was looking at a rearguard action to try and forestall a more significant opinion suggesting that even more contribution limits would be unconstitutional. He imposed a test that would look at how these limits might affect competitiveness, and it's not clear exactly where the line is, but it is clear that some contribution limits are now too low as to be unconstitutional under the First Amendment. The other case, FEC versus Davis, which was also just mentioned, this was a case that the court recently decided, and what the case involved a provision of the McCain-Feingold law that said if you were running as a candidate against a millionaire candidate, you could collect larger contributions if you faced this millionaire candidate and who's self-funding. And the court, in an opinion by Justice Alito, not only said that that system was unconstitutional, but also said things, which I'll talk about the equality rationale for campaign finance regulation, which suggests that there's a majority of the court that is extremely skeptical of such rationales for regulation. On the spending side, as I mentioned, the original 1974 amendments to the Federal Election Campaign Act said you couldn't spend more than $1,000 relative to a clearly identified candidate. There's a whole issue as to what relative to means, and if you could easily get around that by avoiding magic words of advocacy. But even putting that aside, the court said spending limits go to the core of the First Amendment. Strict scrutiny needs to apply, and if you have a limit on what people can spend independently, that's going to shut out everyone except for candidates, the institutional press, and parties from being able to participate in the process. And the court said, therefore, those limits were unconstitutional. The court said the government's interest in preventing corruption was too attenuated because if the spending is truly independent, it might be at cross purposes with a candidate. And the court also rejected the equality rationale for regulation as being wholly foreign to the First Amendment, an argument which in a later case, Justice Breyer said cannot be taken seriously, but it seems that the current Supreme Court is taking it very seriously. Buckley did not reach the question of whether spending by corporations and unions would be constitutional. There was an existing ban on corporate and union treasury funds being spent on campaigns. Corporations and unions could spend separately through PACs, but not spend their treasury funds. Buckley didn't address the question of whether that would be constitutional, but in a 1990 case, Austin versus Michigan Chamber of Commerce, the Supreme Court upheld a Michigan law very much like the federal law that limited corporate spending in candidate elections. The Austin rationale was preventing the, quote, corrosive and distorting effects of immense aggregations of wealth that are accumulated with the help of the corporate form and that have little or no correlation to the public support for the corporation's political ideas. The court called this a, quote, different kind of corruption. I think it is actually better understood as an equality rationale. The idea is that there's something wrong with spending that's out of proportion with the public's views on an interest. Although the court didn't call it an equality rationale, it was at least in tension with Buckley's statement that equality could not be taken into account, leveling the playing field could not be taken into account. And so this case has been out there. It's been out there for since 1990. It has not been overturned. In the McCain-Feingold law, was passed in 2001. Among other things, it expanded this ban on corporate and union direct spending from their treasury funds, imposing a PAC requirement on so-called electioneering communications. Electioneering communications, ads on TV or radio broadcast in the period before the election that reach enough people and that feature the candidate for office. So you might say, call Barack Obama, tell him what you think of his plan for Social Security, and that this would be, if it was broadcast on TV or radio in this period, it would be subject to the same rules. Corporations, unions could not pay for it from their general treasury funds. In the McConnell case, by a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court upheld this rule, and it said that that the Austin case remained good law. For that to happen after Chief Justice Rehnquist switched his vote from agreeing with Austin to disagreeing, Justice O'Connor switched her vote the other way, which is a switch back from where she used to be. And so by the narrowest of margins, this was upheld. But now into the Roberts Court, we're moving into a period where the court is poised to strike down the long-standing ban on corporate and union spending. In a case called Wisconsin Right to Life 2, with the replacement of Justice O'Connor with Justice Alito, you had a very fractured court. 3 justices are ready to overturn Austin outright. The controlling opinion by Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito is kind of a death by 1,000 cuts approach to, rather than say it's unconstitutional, but to create a loophole that covers almost all the ads that would be broadcast. And so that's where we are on the spending limits. If we have time later, I can talk about exactly how that happened. Let me just conclude by mentioning again that FEC v. Davis case, which was a case involving contribution limits. But the most troubling thing there is the statements there about leveling the playing field and equality. Very strong statements by 5 justices against that idea, which seems to call into question Austin. And so especially as we get to the end of the term, it would not be a shock to me if we saw the Austin case overturned this term by the Supreme Court in the Citizens United case. And I will leave it at that.